Okay, this is an important topic. What are the most common ways that different organizations get compromised? Now we can go in history and take a look at different types of the attacks that occurred on some larger companies and analyze the attacks like that. And we will do something similar towards the end of the course, but right now I want to discuss most common types of the attacks. Now usually it starts small, by an attacker compromising just one device within that company. Usually that device was the weakest point that allowed the attacker to get access to the inside network. And that device most commonly isn't what the attacker wants, so the attacker can use it to further on enter the company by using different methods to infect other devices and perhaps even the servers where he can extract wanted data or make his presence unknown and keep monitoring everything. Usually the attacker will drop some type of payload, whether it being a backdoor, a keylogger, a ransomware, or any type of software that will allow him to achieve what he wants with that device. But all of this sounds easy. However, it can sometimes be extremely hard or close to impossible to infect some system, especially if it's heavily protected with the best security strategies. But there are also companies that don't want to invest too much into security and they later pay the bigger price after getting compromised. One of the most common ways that systems and devices get hacked is through unpatched vulnerabilities. Now, this is usually due to some service or software running on a device that didn't receive latest updates or patches. This is why it is always important to regularly update your device operating system as well as all of the services that it might have. Always update to the latest version. Now, how hackers discover this is usually a standard procedure. First, we have a developer writing the code for some software. Developer might not pay that much attention to security details, so when the attacker looks through the same software, whether by reverse engineering it, or by disassembling it, or simply by just checking the code of the software if it is open source, he can perhaps notice a vulnerability or a bug within that code. The developer isn't aware of that issue, so he sends his software that later gets deployed by some company and perhaps starts running on a server. And the attacker who is aware of the bug can try and weaponize it in order to get access to that server. There, he can install his payload, which then gives him the full control of that server, and all of that because of a small bug in the code. Now, when we say unpatched vulnerabilities, we can differentiate two types of vulnerabilities: the already existent and known vulnerabilities that have patches, and the what we call zero-day vulnerability. Now, the first one is self-explanatory. It is already a known vulnerability and it has a working patch or update available for it. And there are also existent exploit codes online for this vulnerability. So when a company gets compromised through this type of vulnerability, it is usually due to their lack of updates. Now, this might seem like everyone won't get exploited like this. However, sometimes there are a lot of libraries and softwares that you have to keep an eye on and patch them regularly on time. And this can be overwhelming for a smaller company. On the other hand, we have more serious and more dangerous zero-day vulnerabilities. Now, we will devote more time to them later, but what a zero-day essentially is a vulnerability that was not discovered yet, nor it has a patch available for it. Zero-day can be a threat to anyone, especially if it's found in an operating system or some widely used library. Aside from patched vulnerabilities, probably even more dangerous and most common way of attacking is social engineering, specifically phishing. Now, unlike the previous mention where you exploit software, here you exploit people. It doesn't need to have a software vulnerability. It is essentially tricking people into doing something that they shouldn't be doing. Let's say an employee logs into the company's server every day for work. She uses his username and password in order to do so, and he visits the login page on that server to provide his credentials. Now, what an attacker can do is clone that page and make it look exactly the same as the official company page. Then send the employee that page to log in. No, he wouldn't do this directly. He could use some various methods to make the employee actually open its page through various social engineering tactics. Then, if the employee falls for this and provides his credentials to the fake page, the attacker would then get those credentials and can use them to log into the server and get access to it like that. And the third most common vulnerabilities that get a company or a device compromised is weak credentials. Now, this is something you probably heard a billion times, but it's true. Having strong credentials is very important as a security measure. For example, the username and password that you see right here will get almost any company compromised due to its password being rather weak. For example, more appropriate and stronger password would be something like this. Now, of course, besides these three things that we discussed, these are not all the ways to compromise a company. These are just broad examples, and all of these attacks can be different depending on many factors. The point is that there are many outside threats for every company out there, and not just for companies, but also for regular people. That's why it's important not to only provide a good security strategy, but to also educate the employees in a company of the ways that they can be targeted. Okay, now that we covered some of the most common ways that companies are targeted, let's proceed to the next lecture.